Hey everybody, welcome to day 10 of 12 for our 12 days of Christmas, where we're digging into some of the different aspects of Jesus' birth and the years after. Today we are coming to you from Matthew 2, verses 13 through 15. So short 2 verses, but some pretty important stuff happens here, and so we're going to kind of dig into that. This is the escape to Egypt. When the Magi had departed, an angel from the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod will soon search for the child in order to kill him." Joseph got up and during the night took the child and his mother in Egypt. He stayed there until Herod died. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophecy, or through the prophet. "I have called my son out of Egypt." And that came from Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. So the passage actually continues. So we're going to talk about that escape here, but it continues after that. When Herod knew the Magi had fooled him, he grew very angry. He sent soldiers to kill all the children in Bethlehem and in all the surrounding territory who were 2 years old and younger, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. This fulfilled the word spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and much grieving, Rachel weeping for her children, and she did not want to be comforted because they were no more. So this passage, it's fairly disturbing. Not just the part about the murder, but that when finding out that the king had been born, Herod ordered him to be killed. So they disappear, and an angel appears to Joseph in his dream again, and so they basically get up in the middle of the night and they disappear to Egypt. This is the part where it's really critical that they had that gift from the Magi of gold. So they had the ability to pay as they essentially became illegal immigrants. They disappeared off. Typically, someone with a lot of money would have announced where they were going and let people know, but that was so dangerous when Herod was coming for blood. And so we have this moment and this spot. Now, immigration is a touchy subject in the United States. Whether you've ever looked into how hard or how difficult it is to become a legal immigrant in the U.S., however that looks, but it is something important that we realize that Scripture talks over and over about fleeing from one land to another. In fact, the Israelites are reminded over and over in the stories that they themselves were people who had to flee from the homeland of Egypt and flee to Canaan. And they moved all over. They were a mobile people. And so for a long time, the Israelites themselves were seen as immigrants. In fact, one of the key phrases that gets used to remind people is this phrase that says, "My father was a wandering Aramean." And that is supposed to remind us that essentially when we're following God, sometimes it leads us in places where our lives are at risk, where we need other people's help. I imagine that Mary and Joseph, even with money, needed help when they got to Egypt. And then Scripture points out that was a part of this prophecy. "I have called my son out of Egypt." Paul himself flees off also to Arabia to learn from other Christians in his early story. He actually learns for about 3 years from a couple of women and a couple of men. And so there is this history of people moving from one place to another, of immigration, of needing to rely upon one another. And scripturally, we have these passages where when we look at and take care of people who are immigrating, that is a part of our call. Specifically, there's a passage, many passages. I think 247 mention immigration in the whole Bible. And now about probably a quarter to a third of those are just passages that talk about, like identify someone as an immigrant. Depending on which version, that might also be alien. And so there's a bunch of them. The big ones is that over and over it tells you to take care of them as people of faith. Usually listed with orphans and widows. So take care of the orphan, the widow, and the alien. To take care of those who are fleeing. And so that's why there's so many faith-based, Jewish and Christian faith-based refugee places where they help refugees who are running for their lives to get resettled in the United States. There's a fantastic amount of folks of faith who have taken this and said, how do we help people legally and safely find a good life? And how can we be that hand and arm of God? And so it's important for us to know that that is a part of Jesus's life too, that in his very early days, it was very, very dangerous for them to have to escape in the middle of the night. Now, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that has happened even in the last 30 years between Central and South America and the United States, where people are immigrating both legally and illegally, but they're at risk of being murdered and killed. I spent 10 days in Guatemala learning about the plight of the Guatemalan people. And there I learned firsthand of a time where a quarter of the people of Guatemala, which is about 1 million at the time, were either murdered, disappeared, or forced to leave their homes and immigrate somewhere else. The government didn't care where. And in the midst of all of that kind of suffering, there were many people from different countries, both in South and Central America, and then in the United States, that said, how can we help? And those stories are not new. They're not unique even. Even now, I remember when I was deployed hearing about Darfur and hearing about Christians who are being persecuted and then welcomed into the United States as refugees. So it's important to know that is a part of our world. So even if we struggle with issues about immigration, to know that God cares about everyone. And so trying to figure out ways to care for others, even in the midst of following the law or following what we see as right, to remember that first and foremost, before we start making a political opinion, we should probably find out what God thinks about it. So my invitation for you is to dig into that. You can always do a Google search on passages that mention aliens or immigrants, and if you want to learn more. But the Israelites from the very beginning were commanded by God to immigrate. Abraham, commanded by God to immigrate, just over and over. This was a passage. And then Jesus, to save his life, had to immigrate. Luckily, he came back, and we have the whole rest of his story as he mentored and taught people throughout Israel. So I hope this taught you something, shared something with you. And if it challenged you, spend some time in prayer talking to God about that. Hope you have a blessed day.